The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. You've joined the Bridging the Data Divide webinar. We're going to be starting here in a few minutes to give everyone a chance to get onto the webinar. So if everyone will just sit tight, we'll get started here in 2 or 3 minutes. Welcome everyone to the Bridging the Data Divide webinar. We're going to give everyone just another minute or two to get on the webinar and make sure everything is working. So just give us a minute. We'll get started in earnest here in 1 or 2 minutes. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone today, and thank you for joining us for this Bridging the Data Divide webinar. I believe we have over 500 registrants from lots of different countries today on this webinar, which makes it clear that this topic of finding a way to manage and unify all the various data sources required for accurate sustainability reporting is really a relevant problem. My name is Tim Porter, and I have responsibility for our partner relationships here at Urjanet, the global utility data provider. And I'm joined today by Mike Bruce from ThinkStep, whom we've had a great relationship and partnership with for years. And Mike, I'll let you introduce yourself and then I'll get us kicked off.
Fantastic, thanks Tim. Hi, good morning, good afternoon everybody. My name is Mike Bruce. I'm solution engineer here at ThinkStep. So a key part of my role is to sit down with organizations, understand their corporate sustainability initiatives, what they're doing today, how they're doing it, where any challenges lie, and then using a combination of ThinkStep's software technology, database content, and professional services, really framing a solution to help them get to where they want to be.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today, Mike. You're really an expert in this field, and I know people will love to hear the insight that you have. And as I said in the introduction, we've got over 500 people from all over the globe, lots of different countries represented here today on this webinar. So clearly everybody has some interest based on their own experiences with their own specific sustainability scenario within their organizations. And while we were working together preparing for this webinar, rather than starting off with a typical vanilla agenda slide, you'd come up with a great idea of starting things off instead with a quick story of a conversation that you'd recently had, I believe.
That's right, yeah. So yeah, before we get started, I just want to tell you about a conversation I was having about 2 or 3 months ago. It was with the corporate responsibility director of a global manufacturing business. And they had a system to collect data. They had that set up, which was a great start. But it was time intensive, and they'd be going right down to the wire when it came to corporate reporting. And one of his real frustrations was he was saying, I've got all these really smart people, and they spend all their time collecting data and checking it's there. And what I really want them to be doing is analyzing the information, sharing insights and advising on investments, making recommendations, things I can actually use to help guide the business forwards. So I asked him, have you thought about connecting an automatic feed from the utility supplier direct into a cloud-based system? And they didn't even know that was possible. And that's when I realized that they're probably not the only ones. So we picked up the phone to Tim and said, we need to plan this webinar and share this information.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common scenario that it seems to be becoming more and more prevalent these days. Because if you think about it, accessing the data really can be a pretty big hurdle for achieving your sustainability goals. So, what kind of insight can you provide, Mike, sort of on that, how that data quality and getting access to that quality data can be hurdles for people's organizations?
Absolutely. So I think everyone listening can relate to this in some way, shape, or form. That when I say access to quality data to ensure accurate reporting can really prove to be a major hurdle. Whether you're trying to track performance against targets, plan improvements, drive operational efficiencies, without that solid foundation of good quality data, you can't gauge where you are today. And that really limits your ability to plan effectively, for where you want to be in 2, 5, 10 years' time. So if you move to the next slide, what we are seeing is that increasingly corporate sustainability teams need to access data from more and more departments within their organization, different locations, different managerial hierarchies to source this information. So this information could come from HR, for social responsibility reporting, or aligning with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and gender equality, or safety metrics, procurement information regarding, purchase goods and services and supply chain engagement, accounts, utility bill payments. We're going to come onto that later in the presentation today. Production information. So KPI tracking, per unit produced, raw material information, helping respond to international guidelines like GRI, and operations. We're increasingly seeing the requirements for detailed logistics tracking information as well. But if we move to the next slide, we'll see that these requirements are not just limited to the data stored within the organization. It's also external sources that teams need to tap into, like emissions factors, or weather information, or currency exchange rates need to be applied to meet reporting requirements and gain effective insight to mitigate sustainability risk across the organization. So again, adding another layer of complexity. And if we move to the next slide, you can see that these data silos, they occur naturally. They occur naturally in every organization. You've got to engage multiple teams and personnel across different departments, different locations, and those teams can be reluctant. They can be reluctant to commit and maintain the financial and personnel resources. So it can start to feel like there's a divide, a bit of a divide between what your team are trying to achieve and where the data that will help you do that is located. And there's a natural sort of concern that it's going to be too complicated to attain this data in an efficient manner. But it doesn't have to be. And that's really the subject of the webinar today. So if we move to the next slide. So using the right combination of technology and know-how, we're able to create connections to set up an efficient data ecosystem for the organization. So we're not looking to reinvent the wheel here. If there's data that sits in an existing system, we can look to connect with that to implement a single source of truth for an organization's sustainability data. And we've got a proven track record of doing this. So we've integrated with enterprise resource planning systems like SAP, for example, logistics service providers to obtain detailed logistics data analysis, specialist energy management systems, getting into the real detail of on-site energy tracking, and CRM systems like Salesforce. We have a dedicated corporate sustainability solution that sits on the same Force.com architecture. And if you're interested in any more of that information, please do reach out after the webinar. But one of the integrations that has been made really successful by the great work that Urjanet's doing is tapping into utility bill information. And I want to share with you a story from one of our current customers. So if we move to the next slide. So our customer is a global healthcare business, and they were facing significant challenges when it came to managing utility bill information and sustainability reporting. So part of the challenge was that their individual locations paid the energy bills themselves. So there was no oversight of whether or not these bills were paid on time, no reports showing late fees incurred, things like that. And access to utility data was difficult. So there was a lot of time spent on manually uploading bills, one at a time for all these locations, as well as, trawling through spreadsheets to get this information. Data quality was a challenge. There were a lot of sort of touch points for the data before it was getting compiled, and really leading to hundreds of hours spent on aligning all this data, all these reports, to be able to respond with international reporting guidelines like the Carbon Disclosure Project, for example. And the solution that we put together, which was implemented with the expert services that Urjanet provide, was a central cloud-based corporate data platform with an automatic utility data feed through Urjanet, which basically meant that the bill data, rather than having to grab a paper invoice or go through one by one and upload separately, that bill data flowed direct into the central system. So accounts payable got immediate insight for budgeting purposes. The sustainability team got oversight of the consumption data for reporting. And what I want to do is I want to hand over to Tim here to tell us a bit more detail about what we actually do with the Urjanet connection and some of the value that brings.
Great, thanks, Mike. That's a great example. It's clear that when you've got so many different teams within an organization, so many different departments that touch some of this information, generally it's no one's job, or no one feels that it's their job to be the one that provides that data to the other teams. And so the sustainability people would like one set of information from these invoices. The accounts payable team would like another set of information from these invoices. And no one's in particular feeling like it's their job to be the provider of this data. So it always does create hurdles in getting the information that you need. So it really is a great problem to kind of take out of the hands of everybody who's typically had to solve it and put it in the hands of some sort of outsourced software platform. So maybe to start with, let me describe a bit of the scope of the challenge. And I guess to start with some good news, there is a wealth of data that's sent to your company on a regular basis every month via invoices from all of your utility providers. You get spend information, you get usage and consumption information at a detailed level down to individual metered points of delivery. You get information on the tariffs that dictate how you're paying for your consumption, and all the different rate components at a very granular level around what prices are for on-peak and off-peak usage, and consumption at peak levels, and all these demand charges. So there is a lot of information, fortunately, that is being provided to your organization every single month. Now, the bad news is that that information is coming to you in a wide variety of ways that is typically very difficult to consume in a way that you can be smart with using the data that's provided. So most of the time it's provided on a piece of paper, that's sent via an invoice, or possibly as a PDF of that paper invoice that you can get from your utility company, or it might be information that's made available just on a set of screens from your utilities portal that you could look at. So if you could just have a way to get that detailed information off of those invoices, there would be so much value, and especially if you could do that in an automated way. Well, there is a way that typically is used, and that is, as you had mentioned earlier, to have people manually enter this data from those invoices coming into the locations. And that does work. Might work for when you've got a handful of locations, or you only want to collect a handful of data elements from those invoices. But the bad news kind of gets worse, because each of these invoices that you need to do that with is going to be in a completely different format from different utility providers. Wouldn't it be great if they would just kind of all agree on a format that they could use, at least for the layout of the invoice itself? But we all know not to hold our breath for that to happen. We've integrated with over 5,000 utilities globally today, and there are still lots more for us to do. So that's a pretty big group of people that don't generally have a reason to try to find ways to do things in the same way. So the problem gets challenging because there are so many different utilities that you've got to work with. Now multiply that problem of detailed data arriving in these incompatible formats by the number of different commodity types that you're using. So you're going to have invoices from gas, from power, water invoices, waste invoices, solid and liquid waste. And then multiply that number by the different utility providers that you're using for each of those commodity types. And then multiply that by the number of all the different locations that you have. And we've got one example of customers receiving over tens of thousands of electricity invoices alone every month. And that's coming from hundreds of different utility providers. So suddenly relying on people to manually gather this info, even at a high level, really quickly becomes a pretty big effort. So if you then throw on the complexity, as we've got such a global audience today, of mixed locations across the globe, then you really complicate things. Now you've got different languages, you've got different currencies, you've got different ways to describe units of measure, you've got different things that are tracked in countries that aren't the same across the globe. For instance, in Europe, we saw for the first time, as we started integrating there, something called calorific value, which has to do with the burnability or the density of natural gas, which doesn't exist in the U.S. So all these things start to complicate the problem even more. So that is the problem that we specifically feel like is perfect for automation. So, and that is the problem that Urjanet has kind of made our sole purpose in life, is trying to automate this problem. And the best way to tackle this huge disparity of incompatible data sources is to leverage technology, to leverage software. So let me describe a bit about how this automation works, how this platform takes the use of software to solve this problem. And it starts with onboarding or linking your utility accounts onto this Urjanet platform that we built. And that's typically done by customers linking their accounts, providing the username and password information that allows our software to automate logging into the utility portals that are where most of these invoices are housed, or where this data is typically kept. And so you activate these utility accounts. You do this one time so that we are now linked, our platform is now linked to your specific utility accounts, to your specific utility providers that you're using. The second step involves us then going out and using that access, using that linked account to retrieve the data that you're looking for. And we've written over 5,000 of these integrations that I had mentioned before. We're adding dozens every month. And these integrations are actually specific pieces of software that know for an individual utility provider what their website looks like and how to navigate it, to find where the invoices are stored, where to look for new invoices that are being posted. And it also understands specifically how that provider's utility invoices are structured. So we can download with software that structured invoice file that's intended to be printed, but it's actually a data file. Inside of those PDFs that you download from the websites are field names and field values, and it's not something where the software has to guess about what it's seeing. It's being told specifically because of these structured PDFs. So that's what our technology is primarily responsible for, is navigating these websites and downloading these bills and parsing the data from those bills. The third step then, once we've extracted that information from those invoices, is normalizing it and providing it as a unified feed that can then be imported into a system that's going to let you do intelligent things with the information that we're providing. And that's the third and final step. And the integration that thinkstep has done with our data feed allows for the data we're collecting on behalf of the customer to automatically be loaded into Sophie and then show up in kind of a hands-free fashion for people to do smart things with once it's in the system. Now, this serial set of 3 steps is really more of a loop. Once you've onboarded the utility accounts, you're able to sort of take your hands off the wheel at that point. And it's a hands-free system where our platform will automatically go out and check every day to see if there's any new invoices that have been posted, so that new data that arrives from the utility company will automatically just show up in the Sophie system. So effectively, once you do the initial work to link the accounts, at that point, it's sort of batteries included. No one's doing anything after that. And you can just rely on showing up in the morning and launching Sophie and seeing any new data that's shown up from new bills that have been posted by your website, or from the utility website, in the system. So kind of gone are the days where you only get a visibility into how your sustainability performance is looking once a year. Gone is the day where you don't really know throughout the year, early in the year, if changes that you've tried to make in your sustainability performance are having an effect. You get to see that information as it's changing, as it's evolving. So it's, in addition to being a much more efficient way of getting the data, a much more quality-rich way of getting the data, you're also getting it in a much more timely fashion so that you can see this and even make adjustments to things that will have an impact on your sustainability reporting throughout the year as things are going on. So that is a quick description of how the platform works. Again, we are just plumbers. Our software really does nothing other than providing the data. It's really getting that data into a system that really lets you drive value from it. So that's what we've done through this great partnership that we have with thinkstep. Our data, which is a really valuable set of information, isn't really information. It's just data until it's put inside of something that people can do something with. And that's what, Mike, why don't you describe a little bit some of the details of the things you can do once you have this automated feed of really rich information.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to what you're saying about having that that data in the streamlined process, moving away from those multiple disparate processes into a single streamlined centralized system, what that enables organizations to do is to share that information with the right data to the right people, enabling them to make decisions fast. So providing facilities managers or maintenance personnel with the consumption and cost information that are going to help them drive energy efficiency projects, reduce late fees, seamless data flows behind the scenes that reduce that human error component, and just provide that additional confidence in the quality of the data in the system. So really being able to demonstrate that information that comes straight into the system from the utility, minimal hands touching that information, to be able to then drive dashboards and understand additional insight from that data. So if we move to the next slide, we can give you just an example of what the kinds of things that you can do with this information. So, tracking natural gas consumption on a monthly basis, not just the consumption data, but the financials as well. And Tim spoke to, you've got these challenges of different units of measure, different languages, different currency exchange rates, and that is all managed in the centralized Sophie system. Also, if you want to understand, get into the detail of, when you're using this, consuming this data, this electricity, for example. So the time of day, are you using it at peak times? Are you using it off peak or shoulder periods? Are you on the right tariff, for example? Can you save money going forwards? Looking at waste information, can you track that on a daily basis? Who's taking your waste loads? Where are they going? Invoice information, tracking that in the system, and then being able to break down electricity consumption, whether it's actual information, whether it's estimated information, and providing additional calculations on top of that. So if we move to the next slide, we can have a look at what we can do with that information. So really delving right into the detail of high frequency information. So electricity consumed on an hourly rate or a half hourly or 15-minute basis, scoping that out over the week, understanding whether equipment's running overnight or over the weekend that shouldn't be, really leading to additional insights which can help us save costs, and effectively plan our operations. Tracking performance against targets, so setting targets for those data points, managing the projects or the actions that you can take to ensure that you hit those targets going forwards. And of course, mapping that information against emissions factors, like we discussed earlier in the presentation. So understanding your GHG impacts in line with international standards like the GHG protocol, for example. And once you have this oversight, once you have this information in the system, you can effectively go back through the data, mine the information and look for trends, and then actually tell the system to forecast ahead and say, if we continue business as usual, where can we expect to be? Can we bring in weather information, degree day information to forecast ahead our consumption based on the location of our buildings, for example? All of this additional insight is taken care of in the system. So we have customers who have previously spent loads of time putting together these systems, trying to track these normalizations, all of this different units, different currency rates, different languages. And they come back to us and they say, this is actually a direct quote from one of our customers. What are we going to spend our time on now that Sophie does all the work for us? And that's a great win for them, and a fantastic feedback for us. So we know that we're on track, and this solution is actually delivering value to organizations worldwide.
Yeah, that's a great example. There's nothing better than hearing someone say that the people they've hired to do specific jobs are finally given the time to do those jobs. I can't tell you how many companies we've spoken with where they feel like their sustainability personnel, which many of them might not have even had a sustainability team until recently, or maybe people on the phone today or on the webinar today are just exploring getting a full-time sustainability team in place. Half the time they feel like those sustainability experts are having to pretend that they're data people, that they're data gatherers. And you really don't want to be a hunter-gatherer of data if you really are trying to drive the sustainability performance of your organization. The less time you can do that, the more time you can do what it is that you're really hiring talented people to do. So that's a great example. Well, thank you for that, Mike. That's I think a really good couple of stories that you've told, and hopefully people on the webinar today have gotten some insight into how this combination of an automated system for gathering the data and a really powerful system to use that and turn it into information to drive actions can be really impactful for their organization. So we've got a bit of time, and we've got a handful of questions that have come in that we're going to try to cover. So let me start with the first one here, and this may have come on before you talked a little bit about this, Mike, but the question was, do you have the ability to incorporate granular interval data as well as monthly information from invoices?
Yes, great question. Very much so. Like we showed in the dashboard, we actually have a dedicated high frequency or interval data capability in Sophie, and what that allows customers to do is to really discover any energy wastage which may have occurred, take steps to prevent further wastage, and to further really improve their energy performance by evaluating it on that higher frequency. So, being able to look at the effectiveness of any improvements they've made, and also being able to provide evidence to go ahead and back up any business cases that team needs to make to invest in these improvement projects going forwards.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The combination of the detailed supply side information that you get each month from these invoices with really detailed demand side information that's at that granular level, I can see being really valuable. Now, one of the things that's worth noting as well on the Urjanet platform, as we were writing these integrations to automate getting invoice data from these utility companies, we realized that there are many of those that also make interval data available on their portals as well. So in support of that, Urjanet actually has probably 70 or 80 different utilities, at least around the globe today, that we can also automate the gathering of that half hourly, 15-minute, I think in France it's even 10-minute granular interval data daily. So just like your invoice data being able to automatically show up in the Sophie system every month as new invoices are posted, the Urjanet platform can also help automate that granular interval data showing up every day. So when you show up in the morning, inside of that Sophie system and those powerful set of graphs would be yesterday's consumption information. And that's a really powerful thing if you're talking about automating something that's at that granular of a level. So that can be a really powerful combination. One other question, Mike, that came up was, if I onboard my buildings with Sophie, is there a way to view historical data there? Can you go back in time and see kind of performance year over year sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. So that is actually a key part of every Sophie implementation. So when we deploy Sophie, we run a dedicated implementation project to set the system up in line with the customer's requirements. And as part of that project, the customer historical data is incorporated into the system. So for different customers, they'll need to go back 3 years, 5 years. It really depends. What it allows them to do is to set baselines and track performance against those baselines going forwards.
Okay, no, that makes great sense. I know for the several customers that we've collaborated with, we've used that capability with our ability to download historical information as well. We've talked about linking your accounts with Urjanet and having us deliver the data on an ongoing basis, which is kind of the primary goal. But it's also possible for you to just flip a switch when you're activating accounts on the Urjanet platform to say, in addition to the most recent bill, please give me everything that you see from the past. And fortunately, most of the utility providers do keep some number of months worth of historical invoice information and interval data. The same thing. There'll be sometimes years worth of interval data stored on the sites, and Urjanet can grab all that data and populate it inside of the thinkstep system. So this next one might be more for me, Mike. The question is, what suppliers do you cover? Do you only cover North American and European utility suppliers? And that's a great question. So first part of that answer, I guess, would be to make sure it's clear what the commodity types are that we support. We can automate grabbing power data, gas data, water data, waste data, both liquid and solid, sewage waste as well as solid waste. All of those have mechanisms for us to integrate electronically to deliver that type of data. And from a geographic standpoint, we do have integrations with, I believe, at last count, 43 different countries. So we're definitely outside of just North America, the US, and in Europe. We've done the high bit character work to support all of the multi-bit languages as well, Chinese, Japanese, Hebrew. We even recently, I was told, we've even done an integration with a utility company in Mongolia. So that might get us most coverage of all accounts in Mongolia. I'm not sure how many providers there are there, but for sure we've got good coverage globally, and that's one of the big values I think that thinkstep and Urjanet together can offer is give you a good visibility into locations that are across the globe.
Absolutely. I mean, just to add to that, I mean, we have customers globally, and a really important part of the partnership for thinkstep and Urjanet was that Urjanet could provide those supplies globally. So just to add to that as well.
Great, great. So the last question I've got here has to do with the waste. Again, this may have come up a bit before the example you gave, because I do remember you showed and spoke a bit about being able to retrieve and provide visibility into waste data. That's something that is central to what you're able to do within Sophie as well, Mike?
Absolutely. I mean, waste tracking is a core requirement for many of our customers. So analyzing different waste streams and treatment methods, but is it hazardous waste? Is it non-hazardous? Is it waste diverted from landfill? What is the proportion recycled or incinerated? Is it wastewater? Is it internal recycling of water? And looking at intensities, not just those absolute values, water in gallons, water in meters cubed, but also intensities like water consumed per square foot, or waste produced per unit produced, for example. So that is all configurable within the Sophie system.
Yeah, we've seen waste to be an interesting commodity type here in the U.S. in particular, a bit different from some of the other ones that we've integrated with. We've got many integrations with waste haulers here in the U.S. There are just thousands of them, and I don't know that I would consider them the most sophisticated of the commodity types as far as what kind of data access they provide, but they've got lots and lots of information that they are providing on their invoices, and it's been it was a challenging exercise for us at first to make sure we could consume all that information in the different formats that it has, but it's certainly a really important part of sustainability reporting. That's obvious. So yeah, we're able to support waste data as well, both from a solid waste standpoint as well as the waste elements that show up on a typical water bill, the sewage and the irrigation types of measurements. So I believe that's all we've got from a question standpoint. We are about 20 minutes before the hour. I think that will probably make some of our European compatriots happy as they get prepared for, I believe there may be some sporting events going on this afternoon. Mike?
There might be.
Pre-match preparation is probably our all. I can speak on behalf of all the U.S. attendees today that we're enjoying it from the sidelines this year, but wish everyone who's playing today all the best. But thank you so much, Mike, for taking the time to spend with us today. Your insight was really valuable. I loved hearing the stories about the customers. Everybody who's on this webinar, please stay tuned as you registered. We'll be able to contact you with how to download this presentation, and any more questions that have come in that we haven't had time to answer, we will make sure we follow up directly with answers to that. So thank you again for joining us for this webinar on bridging the data divide. I hope that everyone enjoyed it, and we look forward to doing this again soon.